Hey beautiful souls, welcome back to Alcott's Stories, the home of heartbreak, healing and unforgettable second chances. Every story here is more than just fiction. It's a mirror to our deepest emotions. Before we dive into today's powerful tale, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing how far this growing Alcott family reaches. Your presence means everything. Now let me ask you this. What would you do if the man who once shattered your heart invited you back just to humiliate you again, only for you to walk in holding the very truth that could destroy his ego forever? Sounds intense? Well, in today's story, a broken-hearted woman returns with twins and a secret that will leave an entire room speechless, and a powerful CEO on his knees, begging for a second chance. So sit back, grab something warm, and let your heart feel every twist in this emotional storm. And because this isn't just a story, it's a journey you won't forget. Ethan Reynolds was the kind of man people whispered about behind glass walls, the kind of CEO who walked through his empire like a storm, dressed in designer suits. At 32, with sharp cheekbones, medium-length raven black hair always swept to the side, and piercing blue eyes that seemed carved from frost, he exuded power, mystery, and a subtle danger that thrilled some and terrified others. His voice was cold and commanding, slicing through boardroom silence like a blade, and his smile, rare as it was, never reached his eyes. He didn't believe in love, not because he hadn't been offered it, but because he saw it as a liability, a distraction from his rise. He built his kingdom with ambition, wit, and a ruthless disregard for emotional entanglements. So when Maya Ahmed walked into his office on a rainy Monday morning, drenched from the sudden downpour, clutching her resume like a lifeline, he barely glanced up. She was everything Ethan overlooked in a person: humble, soft-spoken, brown-skinned with deep soulful eyes, and a modest grace that didn't seek attention. Her hair was always neatly pinned, her eyes often lowered, and her voice steady but gentle. To him, she was just another assistant, another name on a contract, another background presence. Her first week was a crash course in Ethan's temperament. He barked orders at her without eye contact. He corrected her in front of others, cut her off mid-sentence, and treated her presence as if it were a burden. A single typo in a client memo was met with cold, dismissive disdain. "If you can't even type, you're wasting my time." When she brought his coffee with too little sugar, he slid the cup aside without a word and handed her a written instruction card the next day, stapled to her desk. But Maya didn't respond with tears or anger. She listened. She observed. She made mental notes of his preferences, his patterns, his silences. She was never late, never flustered, never visibly shaken, not even when he slammed the door in meetings or tossed files across the desk in frustration. The entire office watched in disbelief as she bore the storm with poise. What Ethan didn't realize was that Maya had known storms before, the kind that tear through homes and hearts, not just boardrooms. Slowly, subtly, things began to change. One morning he asked for a specific client dossier, and it was already on his desk. During a tense call, she passed him a sticky note with just the right legal clause, saving him from a misstep. She anticipated his needs before he spoke, predicted his moods before he entered the building. He never acknowledged it, but he noticed. One afternoon, when a meeting ran long and his voice was hoarse, she silently handed him a glass of warm lemon water. He looked at it, then at her, and for the first time didn't look away. Something in her eyes, steady, calm, unafraid, unsettled him in a way nothing else had. She didn't flirt. She didn't fawn. She didn't try to impress him with words. She simply did her job with dignity and quiet excellence. When a client sent an insulting email, Maya responded on his behalf with such firm elegance that Ethan reread her words twice, stunned. "Who taught you to write like that?" he asked sharply, not expecting an answer. "Life," she said simply, her gaze unwavering. That night he thought about that word, life. What kind of life had she lived that taught her to withstand men like him? For the first time, Ethan found himself lingering near her desk after hours, under the pretense of discussing schedules, just to hear her speak a little longer. She smelled like jasmine and worn books, and it bothered him, not because it was unpleasant, but because it was grounding. She carried herself like someone who didn't belong in his cold, calculating world, and yet somehow made it warmer. One day, he found himself staring out the window during a conference call, distracted not by market trends, but by the curve of her smile as she spoke to a delivery boy. Another day, when she laughed softly at something she read during lunch. He actually paused mid-sentence, the sound haunting him for hours. Ethan didn't believe in love. But something in him was shifting, quietly, reluctantly, against his will. He still scolded her, but his words were less venomous. He still avoided eye contact, but when their eyes met, his lingered just a heartbeat longer. His compliments came wrapped in sarcasm. Not bad. For once, he muttered after a flawless report. She smiled without responding. Something about her silence humbled him. Without warning or permission, Ethan began to care. Not in the way he was used to. Not for possession or power, but in a way that made him question why her absence from the office for a single day made the air feel heavier. He would walk past her desk slower, listen more carefully when she spoke. One morning, when she arrived early and found him asleep on the couch in his office, she placed a blanket gently over him and left a cup of hot coffee beside his hand. He didn't speak of it, but when he woke, he stared at the blanket for a long time. Something inside him, something buried beneath, ego and walls and arrogance, stirred. That night, he stood in front of his mirror and asked himself a question he hadn't dared before. Why do I care what she thinks of me? The answer didn't come in words, but in the quiet image of Maya's eyes, calm, kind, and unafraid. Ethan couldn't understand when it began. Not exactly, but he could feel it, as clearly as the pulse in his wrist. At first, it was just her smile that stayed with him longer than it should have. Then, it was the soft way she greeted the janitor by name every morning, or how she took time to learn the coffee preferences of even the interns, not out of obligation but instinct. He started noticing things that had nothing to do with work. How her earrings always matched her mood. How she hummed under her breath while organizing files. How she paused thoughtfully before speaking, as if every word mattered. Her presence became a kind of quiet gravity pulling him in. One late evening, under the dull glow of his office lamp, he looked across the room and saw her tying up her hair with a pencil, reading a contract aloud to herself. There was something calming about her, something untouched by the cold world he'd wrapped himself in. The next day, he offered her dinner, casually, as if it were a business meeting. She agreed, unaware that he had rehearsed the invitation in his head all morning. At the restaurant, he expected awkward silence, but Maya surprised him again. She asked about his childhood, not his wealth. She didn't blink at the mention of his success, and didn't fawn over his designer watch. Instead, she asked, when was the last time you were truly happy? He didn't know how to answer. Her gaze held his like a mirror, not impressed by what he owned, but curious about who he was. That night, he walked her home, their conversation meandering from books to regrets to dreams. Neither had said aloud in years. The moonlight caught the outline of her cheek as she turned to say goodnight, and for a split second, he wanted to hold on to that moment like something sacred. After that, things shifted. Subtle at first, he stopped raising his voice. He asked for her opinion during meetings. He found reasons to visit her desk that had nothing to do with work. She too noticed the change but said nothing. When he smiled at her one morning without sarcasm, her surprise was evident, and something fluttered in his chest. They had another dinner, then another. He started remembering details. Her favorite flower was white jasmine. Her mother had passed away when she was 15, and she loved rainy mornings because they made her feel close to the past. Their laughter became frequent, natural, the kind that came from being fully seen. One evening, after a long meeting, they stood in the elevator alone. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, heavy with unsaid thoughts. "You're different when it's just us," she said softly. He looked at her, then said, "Maybe that's because you're the only one I don't want to pretend with." Her cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. That night, instead of going separate ways, They walked side by side, nowhere to be, just moving slowly under the soft city lights. He told her about his father, cold, transactional, never present. She told him about her dreams to write one day, to own a quiet bookshop by the sea. He listened, really listened. That weekend they went for coffee. No suits, no boardroom stress, just Ethan and Maya. They sat for hours. Her laugh felt like sunlight through a window he'd kept boarded up. Their hands brushed, and neither pulled away. When a waiter called them a couple by mistake, Ethan didn't correct him. In fact, he liked the sound of it. Their connection deepened with every shared story, every look that lasted a little too long. One night, during a late drive back from a business event, they stopped at a quiet overlook above the city. The skyline sparkled below them like a field of stars. She stood beside him, arms folded, wind brushing her hair across her face. Without thinking, he reached out, tucking the strand gently behind her ear. She looked at him, and in her eyes, there was no judgment, no fear, just open curiosity and calm. "You make it hard to be the man I used to be," he admitted. "Maybe that's a good thing," she whispered. He wanted to kiss her, but he didn't. Not then, not yet. Instead, he drove her home in silence. But his heart was loud with unfamiliar rhythm. Over the next few weeks, they began spending more time together. Never defined, never discussed. Just two people gravitating towards something real. He found himself waiting for her messages, watching the door when she was 5 minutes late. He'd never known this kind of closeness, not with models, not with women who chased his money or name. Maya wanted none of that. She wanted honesty, softness, meaning. And slowly, Ethan found himself offering those things. He began showing up not as the CEO, but as a man finally ready to feel. They had no label, no declarations, just growing closeness that spoke louder than words. The first time he held her hand, it wasn't fireworks, it was stillness. The kind that makes you want to stop time. And that was when Ethan realized, for the first time in his life, he was falling. Not for beauty, not for charm, but for light. Her light. That night, everything felt like it had slowed down, as if time itself had decided to pause in reverence for the moment. Unfolding between them, Ethan and Maya stood at the center of a luxurious hotel, suite bathed in soft amber light, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering city skyline like a living painting. He had taken her there not to impress, but because he wanted their night to feel removed from the world, suspended in a place where only honesty could exist. She stood quietly near the window, her silhouette glowing in the soft shimmer of city lights. And when he approached her, there was no arrogance in his touch, only reverence. "Dance with me," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. She looked up, her smile gentle, and without a word took his hand. They swayed slowly to music that played softly from a speaker nearby. But it wasn't the melody that made her heart race. It was the way his hand rested at the small of her back, steady but tender, and how his gaze never left hers. There were no grand declarations, just the quiet recognition of something real, something precious. He leaned in, not to seduce, but to whisper, "You make me feel like I could be someone better." Her breath caught for a moment, and she replied, "You already are." The air between them thickened, not with lust, but with longing, with understanding, with a connection forged slowly over time and now pulsing like a heartbeat. They moved closer, breath to breath. And when their lips finally met, it wasn't hurried or hungry, it was slow, almost shy, as though they were both tasting vulnerability for the first time. The kiss deepened, full of quiet promises neither dared speak aloud. As they moved through the evening, the world outside their window disappeared. Each touch was deliberate, each glance filled with meaning. He brushed her hair back gently, studying her face, like it held all the answers he'd been searching for. She touched his chest, feeling not just his heartbeat, but every wall he'd built slowly crumbling under her fingertips. Glows were removed not with urgency but with care, like unwrapping a memory they wanted to protect. He marveled at her like she was art, and she held him like he was something breakable. Their night was a slow unfolding of everything they'd kept buried, his fear of being loved, her fear of being left behind. They spoke between kisses, shared fragments of past pain and childhood scars, not to reopen wounds, but to let the other see what shaped them. "I never thought I'd let anyone this close," he murmured against her shoulder. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she whispered back. When they made love, it wasn't about desire, it was about trust, about surrender, about two broken people finding something whole in one another. Their bodies moved in rhythm, but their souls spoke louder, each sigh, each breath, each shiver a language of healing. The night stretched on in quiet waves, touch, laughter, soft moans that echoed like sacred confessions. And afterward, when they lay entangled in the warm silence, Ethan held her like he feared the world might steal her if he let go. His fingers traced her spine absent-mindedly while she rested her head on his chest. Her eyes closed, lips curled in a content smile. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. He paused, then answered, "That I don't deserve this, but I want it more than anything I've ever owned." She lifted her head, looking into his eyes that for once carried no shadows. "You can't own love," she said. "You only get to earn it." He nodded slowly, absorbing the truth of her words. And in that moment, something shifted deep within him, not just affection or attraction, but a seed of transformation. Maya, wrapped in the arms of a man who had once terrified her with his indifference, now felt a warmth that wrapped around her heart like a vow. She believed with everything in her that this was the beginning of forever. They fell asleep that night not as CEO and secretary, not as opposites drawn together, but as two souls who had found a home in one another. And as dawn painted the city in hues of gold, neither of them could have imagined that the very night that made them feel whole would also become the memory that hurt the most. The morning after their night of connection, Maya woke in Ethan's arms, a soft, sleepy smile on her lips as sunlight streamed across the room, painting everything gold, hopeful. She believed that moment was a beginning, but Ethan, already half-dressed and pacing with unreadable eyes, was moving in a different direction. Something cold had returned to him overnight, some wall rebuilt in the silence between breaths. She kissed his shoulder, murmuring, "Last night felt like home." But he only offered a tight nod and a distracted, "I've got a meeting." That day the air changed. He didn't text, didn't call. The sweet rhythm of their bond was replaced by an awful stillness. Days passed, and with each unanswered message, each ignored glance at the office, Maya's heart twisted tighter, disbelief curdling into quiet panic. Finally, after nearly a week of silence, she caught him in his office and closed the door behind her, voice trembling as she asked, "Did I do something wrong?" Ethan didn't look up. "It was just a fling, Maya," he said flatly, flipping a page in a folder without care. "Don't catch feelings. That wasn't part of the deal." His words slammed into her chest like a fist. "What deal?" she whispered, eyes filling with tears. "We never had a deal." He looked at her then, blank, almost annoyed. "Exactly." And just like that, the fragile castle she'd built in her heart collapsed. That same day, she handed in her resignation. No goodbye, no confrontation. She disappeared like a ghost. Too humiliated to collect sympathy, too shattered to explain. The city became a blur of nights spent on benches and empty train stations, stomach hollow, heart aching. She tried to stay strong, but loneliness howled through her every step. And then, one morning, weak from days without steady food and drowning, in silence, she collapsed outside. A pharmacy. A stranger helped her up and sat beside her while she clutched the pregnancy test in her hand, unable to breathe. 2 faint lines, pregnant with twins. The irony cut like a blade. He had walked away from her body, but something of him still lived inside her. For a day she debated calling him, hope battling pride. Maybe if he knew, maybe he'd soften. Maybe the man she'd seen that night, the one who held her like she mattered, still lived somewhere inside his cold exterior. With trembling fingers she dialed. When he answered, she barely recognized his voice, distant, irritated. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. I'm carrying twins. They're yours." Silence, then laughter, cruel, sharp, the kind that left bruises. "You expect me to believe that?" He scoffed. "Come on, Maya. You probably moved on the moment you left. Don't try to dump someone else's kids on me." The phone slipped in her hand as his voice continued, cold and mocking. "Whatever game you're playing, find someone else to play it with." Her vision blurred. Her throat tightened. "You were the only man I ever—" she started. But he cut her off with a final, brutal, "Shut up, Maya." And then the call ended. The screen darkened, but the echo of his voice stayed sharp in her ears. Her body trembled. Her hands clutched her belly. The city lights blurred through her tears as she sat alone on a bench in the rain, realizing she wasn't just abandoned, she was erased. And yet, in the wreckage of her pain, a seed of fire began to grow. She looked down at her flat stomach, placed a hand over it gently, protectively. "You have me," she whispered to her unborn children, voice raw but steady. "And I swear, I will never let you feel unwanted." That night she didn't beg, didn't plead. She walked away from the phone, from the pain, from the love she had given so freely. Something inside her had broken, but something stronger had awakened too. No more begging, no more hoping, no more illusions. The man she loved was gone, but the mother she was becoming had just been born. 2 winters melted into springs, and the shattered woman who had once sat alone in the rain was now unrecognizable, not because she had forgotten the pain, but because she had grown through it. Maya, now a mother of 2 beautiful twin boys with soulful eyes and her same quiet strength, had rebuilt her life brick by brick. She worked early mornings cleaning, spent afternoons learning online business skills, and by evening returned to a tiny apartment that echoed with laughter and innocence. Her hands bore the calluses of labor, her back the fatigue of sleepless nights, but her heart, once splintered by betrayal, beat strong, fierce, and full of purpose. Her sons, Adam and Aiden, were her light, her reason, her resilience. She had not spoken of Ethan in years, not even whispered his name, but his memory lingered like a ghost she had learned to live beside. Then on a grey Tuesday afternoon, while folding laundry, an envelope arrived. Its texture screamed wealth. Gold trim, thick parchment, her name scrawled in expensive ink. She opened it slowly, her brows tightening. Inside was an invitation. "Ethan Reynolds cordially invites you to celebrate his engagement to Alina Grayson." Maya stared at it for a long time, the words heavy in her hands. But it wasn't the wedding that shocked her. It was the venue. The Reynolds Corporation headquarters, the same building where she once poured her heart into work and her soul into a man who broke her. It wasn't love that had sent this invite. It was ego, arrogance, a trap. She imagined him, sitting smugly behind that desk, waiting for her to appear in rags, expecting tears, humiliation, maybe even begging. He had forgotten who she was, or maybe he never truly knew her at all. That night, after putting the twins to sleep, she stared at herself in the mirror. Not the girl he abandoned, but the woman who survived. Her reflection showed tired eyes, yes, but also strength carved through storms. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply folded the invitation and tucked it away, as calmly as one lays down a playing card in the middle of a winning hand. She would go, but not as a broken ghost of the past. She would go as a storm he never saw coming. In the days that followed, she prepared, not with designer dresses or fake confidence, but with grace sharpened by experience. She arranged for her boys to wear little matching suits. She chose a simple yet elegant outfit that didn't scream for attention but demanded respect. And in her purse, tucked neatly beside her phone, was the secret she had carried for 2 long years, a petit, folded paper that bore proof of everything he had once denied. DNA results. The truth, inked in black and white, undeniable. Not to beg, not to shame, but to reclaim her dignity. The day of the event arrived like a quiet storm. She walked into that skyscraper not with fear, but with fire humming beneath her ribs. The staff whispered, eyes widening, not in judgment but in awe. She looked poised, beautiful, unbothered. And beside her 2 little boys with Ethan's unmistakable blue eyes walked calmly, holding her hands. Elevators chimed. The ballroom sparkled. Waiters floated through with wine and smiles. And at the center Ethan stood, surrounded by executives and flashing cameras, his fiancée on his arm, a perfect scene, until he looked up and saw Maya for a heartbeat. The air in his lungs seemed to vanish. The woman he tried to erase had returned, not in disgrace, but in quiet triumph. She met his gaze without flinching, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. She didn't need to shout. Her silence was a mirror, and in it he saw every ounce of what he'd thrown away. The room began to quiet as murmurs spread. Then Maya stepped forward slowly, one son on each side. She wasn't there to make a scene, she was the scene. And Ethan, suddenly small beneath the weight of his own choices, had no idea what was coming next. The tension in the ballroom became a living thing, thick enough to choke on, as Maya stepped forward, each heel click echoing like a drumbeat of justice on the marble floor. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, laughter died in throats, and champagne glasses trembled slightly in suspended hands. Ethan's eyes locked on her, his confident smirk flickering like a candle about to be snuffed out. Alina, radiant in her engagement gown, turned her head toward him in confusion, sensing the shift before understanding it, but Maya didn't stop. Her stride was calm, measured, not fueled by vengeance, but by the certainty of truth. She walked past stunned servers, past shocked employees who remembered her as the quiet, graceful secretary who once vanished without a word, and now returned like a force of nature, with two little boys beside her who wore the CEO's eyes like silent accusations. She reached the small platform where Ethan stood frozen, and without asking, lifted the microphone. Her voice, soft but razor-sharp, sliced through the thick luxury of the air like glass. 2 years ago, she began, her gaze not wavering from Ethan's stunned expression. This man told me that my children were lies. He said I was unfaithful, that these babies, his own flesh and blood, weren't his. And then he turned his back and left. A collective breath was held across the room. Ethan's face paled, his mouth twitching, but no words came out. Maya slowly unfolded the paper she had held like a shield for 2 long years. Her fingers were steady. "I don't need to shout," she said, her voice trembling with a quiet kind of fury. "I only need to tell the truth." She raised the document high so all could see the DNA clinic's seal. The percentages, the certainty. "This is proof. Scientific, signed and stamped. These boys are your sons, Ethan Reynolds. You left them. You left me. And you dared to invite me here, hoping I'd come broken. But I came whole, and I came with the truth." A hush fell that felt like thunder in reverse. No one moved. Even the music had stopped, as if the speakers themselves bowed to her voice. Ethan's eyes darted from the twins, to the document, to the murmuring crowd. "Maya, wait!" he finally blurted, but it was too late. The spell had been cast. The truth had landed. Alina's hand dropped from his arm like dead weight, her expression slipping from poised to betrayed in a blink. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice slicing through the space between them. Ethan looked cornered, like a king stripped of his crown mid-celebration. It was complicated," he stammered. "I didn't know." Maya laughed softly. Not bitter, not angry. "Just tired." "No, Ethan, you didn't want to know. You chose arrogance over accountability. You chose silence over fatherhood. And tonight, in front of everyone, you wanted to impress. Give you what you tried to ignore, your legacy." In the eyes of these 2 boys, the twins stood quietly beside her, sensing something powerful was happening, their small hands wrapped around hers. The crowd, once enchanted by Ethan's status, now looked at him with different eyes, some shocked, some disappointed, some disgusted. A murmur started. Whispers of, "Is it true?" And she was his secretary, right? Rippled across the room like wildfire. Ethan took a step forward, reaching toward the paper as if grabbing it would let him take back the last 2 years. "Maya, I didn't mean to." She stepped back, her head tilted in calm defiance. "You meant every word you said when you called me a liar. You meant it when you laughed at me." That moment ended any illusion of love. For once, Ethan had no clever response, no charm, no escape route. His ego had been cracked open in front of the very people who once worshipped it. And Maya, she didn't gloat. She didn't cry. She stood there with dignity draped around her like armor. She looked at her boys, smiled, then turned back to the crowd. "I don't need an apology, and I don't need validation. I just wanted the truth to be heard, because they deserve it." And with that, she handed the microphone to the MC, turned without another word, and walked back down the aisle of silence, the twins trailing beside her like two little beacons of truth. Behind her, Ethan stood motionless, a man exposed not by scandal, but by the consequences of his own cruelty. And in that silence, in that moment where power shifted without anyone raising their voice, Maya didn't just reclaim her story, she rewrote it. The grandeur of the celebration had long dissolved into a heavy silence. As Ethan stood there, stripped bare of all pretense, the weight of his mistakes crashing down like a tidal wave he had no hope of resisting. His chest heaved, and for the first time in years, tears welled in his icy blue eyes, tears that betrayed the ruthless mask he wore for the world. Slowly, painfully, he sank to his knees before Maya, the woman he had wronged, the mother of his sons, the keeper of a truth he had tried desperately to bury. His voice trembled as he whispered, "I was wrong. So wrong, please. Give me another chance." The crowd held their breath, the tension hanging thick, waiting for her response, waiting to see if the woman who had endured so much would finally break, or if she would stand unyielding. Maya's heart quaked, not from fear, but from the deep scars etched into her soul, reminders of nights spent crying alone, of days filled with uncertainty and pain. She looked down at her boys, the very embodiment of hope and innocence, and then back at Ethan, who was now humbled beyond words. For a long moment she hesitated, caught between the past's cruel wounds and the fragile possibility of a healed future. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady but soft. "I didn't return for revenge. I came to give my children what they deserve. A father." The honesty in her words struck a chord deep within Ethan's heart, awakening a promise buried beneath his arrogance, vow to rebuild what he had destroyed, not just with words, but with unwavering action. Over the following days, Ethan transformed before their eyes, not with grand gestures for the world to see, but with quiet devotion that spoke louder than any declaration. He attended every doctor's appointment. He learned the names of every favorite toy and bedtime story, and he stood by Maya's side through sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. His love, once selfish and shallow, grew rooted in responsibility and respect, watered by genuine remorse and a fierce desire to make amends. Maya watched this change, not expecting perfection, but craving sincerity, and slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to hope. The walls around her heart, once fortified by pain and betrayal, began to crumble, replaced by a tenderness that only time and truth could nurture. The day they chose to marry was quiet, intimate, a sharp contrast to the extravagant party that had once been the stage of their humiliation and heartbreak. Surrounded by a few close friends and family, they exchanged vows not as a spectacle for society, but as a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. The twins, dressed in miniature suits that mirrored their father's own, giggled between them, their innocent joy sealing the moment with pure love. Ethan looked at Maya, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't deserve it." Maya smiled, tears glistening. "We're building something new. For them, for us." In that serene moment, beneath the soft glow of the evening sun, they weren't CEO and secretary, nor broken lovers. They were a family reborn from the ashes of pain, stronger and more beautiful than before. Their story was no longer about betrayal or humiliation, but about redemption, forgiveness, and the unwavering bond of love that can heal even the deepest wounds. And as the twins clung to their parents' hands, the future stretched out before them, uncertain but hopeful, fragile but real, ready to be embraced with hearts wide open.